Right. I think also it will be remiss of us not to mention what is on the front page of Daily Nation, because this is bound also to affect us as far as security is concerned. China may buy SGR loan in fish bandrao, and you know what has been really happening as far as also a bill is actually put out there by, I think, Honorable Rigathi, as far as imports is concerned. That we should actually be, any company that is bidding below 1 billion shillings should not be given a tender here in the country. And we can see this is escalating to be something else as far as the Daily Nation is concerned. If you just pick up this particular, I don't have my soft copy, China may buy SGR loan in fish bandrao as Beijing vows to hit back. MPs anxious over the mounting Chinese debt urge Uhuru to stand his ground, even if it means delaying completion of extension of the railway line to Kisumu. And this story continues on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation today. Maybe we can weigh in on this a bit. And you can see also the development on the front page of the Business Daily. Let me just show you also that from the touch screen. Uganda abandons SGR plan in favor of old line, it says. And this is how it looks on the front page of the Business Daily. Now they are saying that the Uganda government has shelved plans to build a standard gauge railway line connecting the capital Kampala with Malaba town on the border with Kenya, in the wake of fears that Nairobi is no longer keen on extending the multi-billion shilling line from the lakeside city of Kisumu to the common border. And we know what the country is suffering from right now. The external debts that even the IMF right now has given a warning again, and lifting that external debt risk from low to actually medium. And Uhuru is dismissing IMF on debt pile. President Uhuru Kenyatta has dismissed the IMF concerns over the continued pile of public debt and risk of default, arguing he is not bothered by the rising loans. This story continues on page 5 of the Business Daily today. Let's just hear from Ambassador Erastus Mwencha on this. Looking at this China, this particular round that is now widening because of a fish ban, and now China, it says they may buy SGR loan. What does it portend? And Uganda now abandoning SGR plan in favor of old line. Where are we left? Well, we are really trying to service this particular debt. What does it portend, even when it comes to issues of diplomacy?
Yeah. Thank you very much, Dipal. I was away from Kenya, I was in West Africa. But on CNN, I was able to watch the interview of the president.
Yes.
And I thought it went very well. He really made a very strong case.
The president with Richard Quest?
Yes, that's right. That said, Mr. Dipal, I think one of the things that international norm teaches us is to avoid mega diplomacy, particularly matters trade.
Yes.
And there are procedures that should guide us on how we conduct it. I listened to the statement that the president made concerning fish, and I don't know how the bureaucrats have gone about to implement it. Because there are laws which govern, for instance, if we have a sudden influx of certain products into a country that threaten a particular industry, there are protocols that you follow. And there are trade defense mechanisms that you can deploy to safeguard your local industry, which is very legitimate. And I think that's what the president was aiming at. And so here again, one would have expected that the experts in trade would have used those procedures immediately.
Yes.
Because the president was merely giving guidelines. But that said, I think even on the Chinese side, I think leveraging this kind of incident to take it to SGR is going too far. And I think that is, again, a diplomacy that one would say China needs to re-examine that point.
Yes.
So I don't know who is being quoted here and whether this story is true to that extent as it is. If it is a very delicate matter, unfortunate, and I would suggest that immediately we must get our two states get together and avoid this kind of situation.
Right. So we are seeing an escalating trade tensions, what is happening with the US and China right now, tariffs after tariffs, and so you slap me one, I slap you two as well. Yes. Is this escalating also to us as well, as far as this particular hour is concerned? Let's hear from Irungu Hilton.
So first of all, I think we're in no position really to have a trade war with China at the moment. And I think for us, what we need to, as Kenyans, be very careful about is our escalating indebtedness. I mean, just to give you some of the figures, I just give you a sense. So, and it connects even with this referendum call that we are beginning to go through. We are expecting the Treasury to give about 45% of our budget this year to pay back creditors from the Chinese to the World Bank to several European countries. That's roughly about 658 billion shillings. As we stand now, our public debt is about 5.1 trillion shillings. By next year, it will go to 5.6 trillion. If we do not arrest this trend, then by the time that the president is handing over the instruments of power to the next president, probably tucked in front of the Constitution, in fact, in front of Article 1, will probably be a promissory note that will probably be in the range of about 7.1 trillion shillings. So we are in a very difficult fiscal crisis. And I think that is the first point that we would need to make on this trade war debate.
So is the president really burying his head in the sand? Even after the IMF has given some red flags on this, and he says it says that President Uhuru Kenyatta has dismissed the IMF concerns over the continued pile up of public debt and risk of default, arguing he is not bothered. He's not bothered by the rising loans.
So you see, heads of states are essentially commanders-in-chief, but they're also chiefs in confidence. They have to maintain public confidence and, I guess, international confidence in the Kenyan context.
Yes.
Unfortunately, or maybe fortunately, I don't have that obligation. So I'm just looking at the facts, and I would be really interested to have a conversation with our Minister of Finance, or the CS of Finance, for him to explain to us how are they going to arrest the escalating debt that we've got, which is factual. It's not imagination. So those figures that I've just quoted, if there are other figures within the ministry that are more accurate, then let them bring those figures. But as far as I can see, we are really heading for a very difficult 2 to 3 years. In fact, I think we should expect austerity measures from the state, not that we wish them, but that they're probably inevitable given the crisis of public finance.
IMF has given a stalling warning, I should say, excuse me, as far as the external debt is concerned, and they've rated us from now low to moderate. What does that really portend for us? And in light of what the president is saying, that you should just poo-poo, aside what actually the IMF is saying?
First, in international economics, the whole idea of debt is not a benign thing. Countries are indebted. Even China has debt, and the US, and even the richest of countries have debt, public debt, and so on. So it's not something that is just a Kenyan phenomenon. And but of course, when debts are accumulated, there has to be an issue about how that will be breached and so on. The philosophy here, I think, is that countries that have made it, like the Asian tigers, like South Korea, borrowed very heavily. And they were very indebted at some point, but the costs, the sunk costs they put in the infrastructure and so on, countries like Singapore, it paid back. So I think the biggest question is, how do we have the discipline to make sure that whatever you have borrowed pays up and it spurs growth in the economy and creates national wealth? That is something, and the big four agenda is quite promising, but we really have to make sure as a country we work, we have in our philosophy, in our mindset, that economic security is as good as the whole story of our grand strategic outlook as a country. And therefore, we have to have the discipline. And that discipline includes fighting, make sure, corruption, transparency and accountability, and cutting down on wastage. in any way in terms of the fiscal health of the economy. But Dibal, most importantly here, I just wanted to put in the rider just to an adage to what Ambassador Mwencha was saying. Countries don't talk to each other through newspaper headlines, to be careful. And I don't think this is the picture. Beijing wouldn't have to react like that. I don't think that is the actual picture of it, but of course it is good to have that kind of talk in media circles and in public circles. But countries don't talk to each other like this. So I think this is not really the picture, but we ought also to be careful about our conduct of diplomacy.
Thank you.
And public diplomacy.
Dr. Khanenje.
Picking a trade war with China, it is not a winning strategy if we were to try it. The US, as we speak, it's actually losing in this whole process. American farmers are suffering, and they're going to suffer even more. Now, it is true that countries have debt, including the United States has a lot of debt. The difference between them and us, they actually can print dollars. We can't. Okay. The economy a lot more resilient and a lot more adaptable to certain things and pressures than ours. Now, our colleague just said, if assuming all these facts are true, that 45%, which is actually true, of the money we collect goes towards servicing our debt, and that more than 50% of what is remaining goes towards the public wage, and even government itself knows that about 30% of the remaining goes towards, it gets lost in corruption and wastage. At this rate, we'll soon be eating grass because there is actually no money left, for us to spend. And we have to genuinely and honestly reflect on how we are spending money and how we are working. There's just been reading something here with regard to the countries we owe. China, we owe them about 600 billion. That's a lot of money. And it is one thing if the investments we've made with this 600 billion, it's actually bringing back something. We have to re-examine whether we need to go forward or to continue on this trajectory, or whether perhaps we need to see how best we can, for instance, revive all those feeder rails that were moving around the country so it can actually ease transport. Because while it is beautiful to take SGR to Mombasa, most of Kenya still does not have access to transport. Moving a container from Mombasa to Eldoret is almost 200,000 shillings, by road. It's too expensive. And of course, most of Kenya does not live in Mombasa or along SGR. So I think we should sit down as a country and reevaluate our priorities and see how best can we actually grow this economy by making smart investments.
All right. Professor Nomidamba.
What we need to be aware of, and I concur with my colleagues, is that each country, each nation state is acting as the best interest of that nation state. China is not here to provide free service to us. They're here to trade for the best interest of China. And we Kenyans need to sit down and say, what are our virgin items? We should not be buying fish from China. We should be able to produce enough fish using our ponds, Lake Victoria, and the harbor. And we say now, we will not accept fish from you, period. There are other items that we should not accept? Yes. And Kenyans must be able and continue to belt down as we grow. The China rise did not just happen. Mao Zedong was not just a revolutionary, he was also visionary. He expected that they will capture the African continent, not by guns, but through trades and providing services that China have. If you are in South Korea, you will not see Toyota on the street because they're producing their own vehicles and their own needs. And if there is Toyota, it's very expensive. Why are we flouting the whole place with every item you can think of in the world? That's what is driving our debt. And we need to retreat back and say, we Kenyans, what do we need? And what can we produce in terms of what we need? That's the crux of the matter.
Right, that's a crux of
But
what.
my
Yes.
question would be, why would fish from China that has been transported all the way to Kenya be cheaper than fish in Kenya? This is a question we must ask to economists in this country. But Dibal, another picture here is insecurity. Piracy off Somalia coast was caused by illegal fishing by the Chinese and the French trawlers.
Yes.
These are the biggest culprits. And is it possible that we are still getting flooded with Chinese fish through illegal fishing? And they have huge trawlers that they can use to, just take fish and process the fish in those huge ships just across 10 miles of, within the exclusive economic zones, and then just bring it here as if it's for export. And we are happily importing our own fish that has been stolen from the seas. Just the other day, President Uhuru Kenyatta, put these big nations on notice that they were stealing our fish and selling fish to us. Now, if we are not careful, we will still soon have illegal fishing by Chinese or whoever in Lake Victoria, if you are not careful. We have to look at a larger picture here. And by the way, 3 days ago, some of these ships were actually taken in off the Sierra Leonean coast for illegal fishing. It is a security problem.
It is a security problem. Yes. Yeah, we can see the ethical or unethical business practices that is coming maybe from China as well. Yes. In light of how we look for trading partners all over the world, do we just put aside or bury our heads in the sand as far as unethical business practices is concerned, or terms of trade as well? We're standing on guard here on AM Live and keeping an eye on the enemy, of course discussing the matter security here in the region, in the country, and of course taking a panoramic view of what is happening in the world as well. So before we took a short break, we had promised also to continue that discussion about China and what is headlining the front page of a Daily Nation today. China may bar SGR loan in fish ban row. This is what it says from a hard copy here on the front page of a Daily Nation, as Beijing vows to hit back. MPs anxious over the mounting Chinese debt urge Uhuru to stand his ground, even if it means delaying completion of the extension of the railway line to Kisumu. And that story continues on page 4 and 5. But the president doesn't need to do that. On the front page of Business Daily, there's this developing story as well as far as GR is concerned. So Uganda also, they're shelving this particular report. Let me just try and put it back for you there on the front page of the Business Daily. It says that Uganda abandons SGR plan in favor of old line. So what does it portend as far as servicing this debt is concerned? And you can see also Uhuru, he says here as a sidebar on the ticker there, Uhuru dismisses IMF on debt pile. President Uhuru Kenyatta has dismissed the IMF concerns over the continued pile up of public debt and risk of default, arguing he's not bothered by rising loans. This story continues on page 5 of the Business Daily today. Balozi, you had promised to circle back with this. Let's continue with this particular story as also we try and see what is happening internationally.
Thank you very much, Deepak. Just a quick comment, particularly on the fish. Just to agree with what Mustafa said, that it could be our fish that comes back to us. The irony of fish trade globally is that fish is not the origin. There is what you call rules of origin of a product. And for fish, the origin is not defined by even where the fish is caught. It's defined by the ship, the vessel that catches fish. And this is a huge argument that we had, particularly when we were negotiating with the Europeans on economic partnership, because for them they would say, well, we were arguing that the fish, when they come and fish on our shores, they must land the fish first, and then now we can export it so that it's declared as African fish going to Europe. But they argue that it's the vessel that catches fish. But there is a point that was also made here concerning this taste of this fish, that it could be plastic. Exporting food products and agricultural products, again citing for the case of, say, AGOA, when AGOA was declared, we were all excited that we are going to be able to export our mangoes, so we export our fish and all that,
Yes.
and even to Europe. But imports of food is such manipulated by importers because they use sanitary and phytosanitary rules. And this is what I thought the president was hinting at when he was saying, you use tactics because to get a visa for your product of agricultural products
Yes.
takes you no less than 6-7 years to export the US. And that is because US is not competitive in the food products. They defend their own agriculture. So our traders here, our policymakers here, should be smart and not be gullible in the way they go about. That's what I was alluding to. There's defense mechanisms that you use which are internationally acceptable.
Could this also be maybe...
Having said that,
Yes, yes.
I wanted to also... Oh, well, if you want...
No, just continue. Just finish your train of thought.
I was going to talk about the debt issue, but
Please.
If you want us to...
Yeah, please, just go full steam ahead.
On the debt issue, the report here in the newspapers today is about the shilling taking a hit. And the reason that is a very dangerous signal to us, because when we are net importers, a shilling, weakening of a shilling is going to hurt us because it will lead to inflation. Why is this happening? Obviously, the dealers are looking at three critical numbers. They are looking at the announcement by the treasury that they're going to borrow more money, but then they look at which sectors are these funds going to be used for. And if you looked at it, even if it is some of it, it is going to roll over the debt. It's not going to invest in bringing more money. In other words, you are making the debt situation worse. But above all that, there are three numbers that are worrying. One is if you look at the revenue base for the country, for the government, vis-a-vis the expenditure, the gap is so big. And therefore, it means the government will have to borrow to finance that. That is not a very good signal. Look at our exports. The export vis-a-vis the debt. Right now, our exports cannot cover what we have as debt, and this debt is denominated in foreign currency. And the third thing, if you look at the ratio to GDP, is also, this is what Irungu was talking about. So we're living in a very delicate situation. You have seen countries like Argentina, Greece, really get into a situation they would not sustain their debt. So I think what I saw here, the debate by members of parliament, that we need to sit down and evaluate how we are doing these things is critical, and is, time is opportune.
Right. Let's hear from Dr. Mumunzao.
Yeah, I just wanted to make an adage to what Ambassador was alluding to. I wanted to say the head of state was clear that there is a finance bill, there's a finance law. And what he was pointing to is that the law is there. I mean, he was not saying, we will not import fish and so on. But he's saying that the law already is there, but there are ways that countries can always have caveats. You can say, because you can, when someone a hawker is walking around with wares, you say yes or no. They can't force it on you. So one thing is forces of supply and demand and the market economy is such that what is the cost of production and all that, and how does that accrue into the end product? How can sometimes you find that our own fish here is more costly, and therefore anything that comes out from outside there looks attractive? We have to look into those things, the cost of production of our own things, and look for ways to make it cheaper and affordable and so on. So protectionism is not what the world is looking at all the same, but countries have all manner of ways to do that. Now, that kind of nitty-gritty about protecting some certain aspects of the economy should not be seen to be a trade war. There's no trade war going on here between Kenya and China, and that's what I'm trying to underscore here, because we might be blowing the whole thing out of proportion. But all the same, the IMF has not said that. It's just trying to say you need to be cautious. But the question is, we need to look within, because it is only the wearer of the shoe who knows where it pinches. We have to look within and see how can we boost, growth and enhance national creation, wealth creation. There is a lot of, the head of state is point clear that, and he's right that if we invest in infrastructure and we invest in housing, health, and and the whole things that are coming on in manufacturing as stipulated in Big Four, we can get somewhere. And sometimes the means justify, the end justify the means. So we have to ingrain that philosophy, and then make sure that we cut anything else that would derail us as a country to get there.
Thank you. Maybe we can close it up. If there is any other issue that we want to discuss on that particular note, you can highlight now, Dr. Khanenje.
I think the trouble is we are behaving badly like a spoiled brat who spends more than what they're making. Ultimately, you're going to end up with nothing. One thing that is going to be important, and to my fellow Kenyans out there watching from the private and public sector, is that government doesn't have all the ideas, and we also have a responsibility as institutions, as think tanks, as the private sector, to give them certain ideas, especially in the pursuit of Vision 2030 and the Big Four agenda. Some things as basic as agriculture. Farmers, especially in the North Rift and other parts of the country, they've been suffering a lot in the past few years, in part just because of, frankly, in bad policy. And so we can't look forward towards, you can't increase the tax bracket, for instance, if your citizens are making less and less, each day. We cannot get into manufacturing, we're producing nothing to manufacture, for instance. And so we have to go down, or rather go back to basics and tighten our belts and spend money only on things that we need. Today, as things stand, we're spending twice as much as what we're making. When you do that, you're going to find yourself perpetually in debt. So that is an honest conversation that we should have as a country, but also as citizens of this country and organizations and institutions. We should help our government or government departments make the right decision, not just sit back and complain all the time, because sometimes Kenyans were pretty good at doing that.
Right. Finally, no, Midamba?
This is a matter of national security, but it's also a matter of development trajectory. It is very, very important, not only for Kenya, but for the rest of African countries, to understand that together we are a unit and a very powerful unit. The question, why should Ethiopian SGR cost less than Kenya? Why did we not go collectively as a region and say we need infrastructure development? The appointment of Raila is a very important development.
Yes.
And say, what do we need as a region, the continent of Africa's East Africa community?
Yes.
And then go in, negotiate with China based on our best regional interest and bring it down to the level that we can cope with in terms of our capacity to develop. The point is, trade war or trade relationship is the crucial, most important thing that is going to back our development. And therefore, what is it we're producing and what is it that we need to buy? It is simple for us to go to China and buy tiles when we can produce our own tiles. And so we need to fundamentally look at the cost of producing one tile here vis-a-vis the cost of importing one tile from China to here. These are fundamental economics indicators that we as a country need to look at before we start trading with the rest of the world.
Thank you. And I'm trying also to just look at another editorial cartoon that we saw here. Gado had drawn in regard to, Africa trading amongst us, inter-Africa trade, and what is really happening as well, just to try and argument that particular point that Noah Midamba is raising. It's trying to elude me. Just to show you what it really says quickly, I'll do that just in a moment. Yes, here we go. I think this was the 28th of October. Yeah, inter-Africa trade, knowledge sharing. If we may just, of course, focus on Africa itself, buy Africa, build Africa, just as the policies we normally have, yeah, the GDP will go, right? It will go up. There will be a tick up on that. Flexible labor, peace, of course, remittance, and all that jazz. Inter-Africa trade, reinforcing that. And I think that's the way to go. Why should we face East while we have all these resources they're tapping from Africa? I think that will be the abiding question, right?
Well, when I saw this cartoon, I laughed, and I don't know whether Ambassador Mwenche remembers the African Union Summit in 2010. This was the great debate on African Union, the idea that we would have an open border. And a number of us tried to press for free movement of persons, goods, and services across the continent. And I did exactly as that man is standing there with the Inter-Africa trade. I walked up to passport controls as we were leaving the country. And I presented a dummy passport that NGOs had generated called the African Citizen's Passport. It had my photograph, it had my name, and it had some fictitious number. And I said, I would like to leave the country. And the man looked at the passport and he said, "Sir, I do hope that you have another passport."
You know the point that Irungu is making. I experienced it 2 days ago. I was at Lagos Airport going to Abeokuta, and the immigration officer asked me that, look, I carried my African Union passport, and he was asking me, do you have a Kenyan passport? I said, but this is superior to Kenyan passport. He said, no, you must show me that you have a Kenyan. I said, I don't have it, and I'm not sure that you really
need it.
Are in a good place here right now. But having said that, you know, Hassan mentioned a point early on that the reason why Africa is not trading with itself, we have not shaded off our colonial legacy. You know, if you look at French Africa, they want to trade with France. Anglo-Africa is Europe generally, and so forth. China is a new entry, but we always think that imports are superior, and the cost of doing business in Africa is prohibitive. That's what he was alluding. Moving a container from Mombasa to Busia is as expensive as moving from Hamburg to Mombasa. So we really, there's a lot to do, and I think this, as he's mentioned, this appointment and us looking at how we do trade in Africa, this we should encourage what is happening under the African Union.
But I've not had actually any of you really tackling the issue of Uganda now abandoning SGR. I think we've just been skirting around the issue, but have we tackled how Uganda, if now they abandon the SGR plan in favor of the old line, and we were actually piggybacking on, you know, Uganda to just have this continuous seamless flowing trade, how will it affect the country as well in terms of this debt servicing that we are actually experiencing right now? Yeah. Who hasn't spoken? I've lost my sequence.
Maybe not who hasn't spoken, who understands this issue better.
Right, you can pick up.
The point, what I was saying, is that our major solution lies in inter-African trade. And that picture you see is what needs to happen. Because here's the point. Why in the world should we buy furniture from Malaysia when we can make exactly that same furniture in our local area? And, you know, Museveni said at one point that if we don't have the capacity to produce oil, maybe we just need to keep it underground until we have the capacity to do it. We cannot continue depending on outsider for us to survive as a continent, for us to survive as a country. We need to push the limit based on our capacity to be able to do things ourselves and be able to earn from our sweat and blood and everything. This is a matter, I said, a matter of national security, a matter of development trajectory. This is what Mao mapped out in the University of Pudong for China. What about our economists? What about our institutions of learning? What in the world are we doing? What relevances do we have to our development trajectory?
All right.
Why can this, the person who need to be one of the most important person right now is our Minister of Trade.
Right.
That's what's happening.
You've not really actually answered my question about Uganda abandoning SGR plan in favor of the old line. Let's hear from Dr. Hassan Kanenje. Let's hear from Dr. Hassan Kanenje.
Okay,
yes.
Hassan, pick up.
Yeah. The current road, rail, and port infrastructure are part of the larger LAPSET project that was envisioned, several years ago. And we have seen countries, pretty much falling off, electing to take different routes or just deciding perhaps it's not viable anymore. And part of it has to do with the difficulties we've had to go through as a country and the cost even of just putting up, for instance, the SGR. Some of these countries' economies, they're smaller than our national budgets. Okay, every year. And so they actually cannot afford it if they have to do the same thing. And I think it's about time as a country we sit back and see how viable is this thing going to be? Are we still going to actually be able to achieve it, at least within the time frame? And if we do, what do we need to do? Because you have seen countries such as Rwanda, South Sudan is still in turmoil, which of course destroys part of the project. Ethiopia seems to have found new friends with the peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea.
Yes.
And I think we need to go back as a country and our economies need to start rethinking and perhaps have a different thinking with regard to the LAPSO project. Okay, who else should be involved or how can we go it alone, but in a way that's going to be sustainable, because we're still operating under the assumption that all these partners are going to play ball. Apparently they're not playing ball today. So of course it's going to affect us, it's going to cost us, it's already costing us heavily. And unless we decide that, look, I think the rules of the game have changed and the players have also changed, we seem to be left alone, we may not be very successful in the entire LAPSO project.
I don't know if it's possible to come in just on this. And we have the vision for this.
Yes.
I mean, not only do we have the vision, but Kenya has been very active in creating that vision. The vision is really the African Common Free Trade Area vision that we announced in March in Kigali. And one of the things we said there was that we have the potential as a continent with a population of 1.2 million people and a GDP the size of Britain to be a major player in the world arena. So at this point, what we need to do is to safeguard that vision. If we start retreating back into these small little hamlets and cocoons, and if I can just call them counties of Africa, we are not going to produce the kind of power that can actually speak, to China, for example, or to the United States.
That's true.
Just another line here. I'd wanted to refrain from talking about this, but implementing regional projects has a number of challenges. Hence, the appointment of former Prime Minister as an envoy for infrastructure development.
Yes.
And in the case of Uganda, Kenya, Professor did mention in passing early on that there could be an element of cost. Minister of Finance of Uganda is somebody I know very well, a good friend of mine.
So you could speak to him directly.
Well, that's why I don't want to quote him now, because I don't know what else he did.
A little bit of shuttle diplomacy.
We can task you on this panel.
But there could be a number of things that could have happened. Uganda may have looked at the cost that Kenya has incurred in implementing the SGR from Mombasa to Nairobi. Because in the same story last week or this week, Rwanda is already extending that, doing that SGR on their part. And so there's going to be a gap. And you cannot transship Uganda talking of going to do its old rail, and we are doing SGR. The reason why we are moving to standard gauge is because the 1 meter gauge and the standard were not compatible.
Correct.
It means you have to transship from Kisumu or wherever it is to SGR, and the costs become prohibitive. I think this is calling for diplomacy immediately. This is one of the low-hanging fruits that the Raila should take on, so that you can bring Uganda together and implement this project. And in addition to building what Irunga just said.
That's great.
Right, thank you. The issue of the Africa Free Continental Trading Area and the ratification of some of the African states that were in Kigali as well. Up to now, if maybe update me as well, we know of only 2 countries who have signed or ratified that particular agreement.
No, as we speak,
yes,
almost 10 countries have ratified from what I know.
Almost 10 countries out of the 25.
Yes, and
why is there a slow on the uptake?
Ratification takes a process. You have also, because at the national level there are various mechanisms of ratification. Some do through cabinet, others through parliament. Others want to bring the business community on board, so they take time to consult. So it takes time. I think that will happen. Achieving 22 or 10 is going to happen. The question is not, you can have an agreement. I come from a regime where we established a free trade area and the country is ratified, but you still had obstacles. You have seen East African Treaty is already ratified, but we still have obstacles. What I think is important is not just ratification, is how we can be able to look at issues of trade, mentality change, so that when it is ratified, we can truly start cooperation.
Right.
All right.
Let me just say one thing. There's something we call the logic of collective action and the free rider problem. When you take 8 people and you give them a task, there will be about 3 people who will be thinking one person will take the burden. So the logic of collective action is one of the biggest problems that face this whole idea of development corridors. And we have a lot of development corridors, like the Maputo one, through Mozambique. South Africa took a lot of the burden. Kenya is not doing a bad, unfavorable, rather, to use the right word, choice. We are trying to create infrastructure that will benefit us in the future. Of course, there are cost-benefit analysis there. I don't think Uganda has said it categorically. I know how things are reported here. It's not the way countries talk to each other. But they have pulled out. It's not the right language.
Thank you.
They could probably be wanting to modify the whole thing just to work for them. But the point is, the idea of an African trading bloc that is more efficient and working for the African people under the African conditions in this day and age is something we cannot run away from. And we have to bite the bullet as countries so that we can overcome some of these free rider issues and the whole idea of the logic of collective action. It's not easy to do things as a group, but it is still possible.
Thank you.
Yeah.